As I record this video, 2024 Smash Bros is basically over. We're looking at the new year, basically all of our majors are finished, and competitors are winding down for the holidays. So now, we're starting to look at the end of year rankings coming up soon. But to get a good perspective in preparation for these rankings, and also just for the sake of it, we're going to be looking back at what 2024 gave us. My name's Rister Mice, and today we'll be taking an exhaustive look at 2024 Smash Bros, going over every single major that took place this year, seeing the storylines and notable winners, and go through the narrative going into 2025. But before we can get a perspective on this year, we have to see what the narrative was coming into 2024. The end of 2023 was all about the Four Horsemen narrative, which loomed over our heads. Many of you are likely familiar with the dynamic here, but as much as it was a group of four, you can also see this era as two rivalries of two regions. In Japan, you had Akola, the strongest of the Four Horsemen in 2023, and Mia, seen as the weakest of the four. 2023 Smash saw Akola absolutely dominate his home country, winning pretty much everything. At his heels, consistently, was Mia, who wasn't really able to match Akola except at the very tail end of the year. But where Mia made up for this was in his attendance. While Akola mostly attended only the tippy-top tournaments, Mia is the horseman who attended the most majors, scooping up as many smaller tournaments as he could. In North America, you had Sonics versus Spargo. These two battled a ton in 2023, with seemingly every NA major grands being the two of them together. And in this era, it was usually Spargo's Aegis winning out, except for the end of that year, which saw some character experimentation. But Spargo suffered strongly from consistency issues in 2023, with the rankings ultimately favoring Akola's consistency over Spargo's peaks. A controversial decision at the end of year ranking, just as it was in the mid-year ranking. And that, along with a few other top players in the top 10 like Gluttony, Light, Tweak, and Shuton, basically make up our 2023 narratives. That and one little rising star in Japan by the name of Hurt. Hurt got ranked number 19 in the world at the end of 2023, after basically being unranked before a massive breakout performance put him on the map. Alongside Hurt, two other Japanese players started making their rise in the scene. Snow, who got ranked number 71 in the world, and Raru, who was ranked number 49. And with that, we've got our narratives headed into 2024. We're now going to go over every major tournament from the beginning of the year to the 2024 mid-year rankings, as the rankings this year were done in two half-year segments instead of one full-year ranking. And as is the case most years, 2024 Ultimate started in New York for LMBM. Luminosity Makes Big Moves 2024 took this Four Horsemen narrative that I just spent the whole video so far describing and punted it out of the room. Using his tri-state level up, Tweak took the tournament over the two of the NA Horsemen, with Sonics placing second and Spargo placing third. Though it's worth noting that Tweak and Spargo never fought, with Spargo actually getting upset by the other big story of this tournament, MKLeo, who was making a dramatic return to form after 2023 saw MKLeo be ranked outside of the top 10 for the first time in his entire Ultimate career. Meister made a good top 6 finish, and dual Spacey mains Light and Tilde both placed 7th. This is more important for Tilde, as this was his only top 8 at a major for the year. Outside of top 8, this tournament had several rising stars perform well, but barely miss out on the final phase of bracket. First of all was Shattuck, who placed 9th after a crazy run and is the player here who would continue this dramatic rise. Additionally, Web JP and Sinji both made dramatic breakouts, with Web getting a phenomenal upset over Light and with Sinji defeating Web himself, for both players to place 9th. This is the closest that Pac-Man would get to solo top 8ing a tournament of this size all year. Tweak's win here was absolutely demolishing the narrative of the Four Horsemen, a trend for 2024. But on the other side of the world, at the exact same time, Umebura SP10 was going down in Japan, 2024's first premier tournament. This tournament marked both the beginning and the end for several players. On the positive side, Doromigi made top 8 at his first tournament of this size. most notably taking down both T and Zamba to make it here. Akola and Mia were the first and second place finishers, keeping up the Four Horsemen narrative while it was being destroyed in North America. But on the negative side of things, we saw Kameme make 4th place. An amazing performance, but sadly, this marked the beginning of the end for our favorite Sora main, as this was only one of 3 tournaments he attended this year. The other 2, both also majors, saw Kameme massively underperform as his attention turned towards his newborn child instead of competing. Additionally, Gluttony made 3rd place at this tournament and even got a set over Mia. This was a great performance for the recently ranked 5th best player in the world, but after this, Gluttony would be plagued with issues regarding his hands. And afterward, Gluttony would enter a massive slump that we'll go over later in the video. Other stories outside of the top 8 most notably include Toriguri, a banjo main who made big waves at the tournament after upsetting both Snow and Zamba. We also saw overseas players make good performances, with Void placing 17th, one of his best major performances of this year. With Umabura SP10 giving Akola his first Premier Tier win of the season, we'll be staying in Japan for our next major, Kowloon 9 with Sumobato. Akola didn't end up attending this tournament, and as was the case in 2023, this meant that Mia took the tournament fairly easily. But the tournament winner isn't the big story here. Rather, this tournament marks the beginning of a dramatic rise of a top 50 player to a top 10 player. This tournament marked the beginning of the rise of Rauru. Rauru, who was still going by Raru-kun at this point, went on a massive run at this tournament, defeating the likes of Snow, both Omuwatsu and Doramigi, the 2 best Minmin players, as well as Ashimo. This catapulted Rauru into the conversation of the best Luigi in the world, as YouTubers all raced to make their videos capturing this landmark run. Rauru, now in the conversation of being a top player, dropped the kun part of his tag and promised to keep on competing. Other notable stories from this tournament include Hurt making a good run to another major top 8, continuing his dramatic rise, as well as both Doramigi and Omuwatsu making top 8, marking the only time in 2024 that 2 Minmin players top 8'd the same major. And for our last tournament of January, we have Alt Core 2nd, yet another Japanese major. This tournament wasn't originally considered a major when it happened, being retroactively re-tiered after level 1, the Toon Link main, suddenly became worth way more points. This had a few consequences, but the tournament it influenced the most was Alt Core 2nd, especially given who won. Gluttony, in one of his 2 good Japanese performances this year, won Alt Core 2nd over Rizeyasu, which also marks the only major top 2 Rizeyasu got this year. With this win, Gluttony obtained a Triple Crown, an achievement that includes winning majors in North America, Europe, and Japan, though this is the only Triple Crown holder who achieved theirs retroactively. The other notable stories from this tournament include Fui, an up-and-coming Yoshi player who defeated the likes of Apollo Kage to make top 8. Now, with January over, our string of Japanese tournaments to open up the year were done, meaning we now moved back over to North America for one of the most confusing tournaments of the year, at least in retrospect. Genesis X. Once again, North American Smash is tearing apart the story of the Four Horsemen, because even though Sonics got 2nd and Spargo got 3rd, it was Zamba who won the tournament. Looking back, this win is confusing as hell, with Zamba defeating Gluttony, Tweak, Spargo, and Sonics twice to win over the best players in the world, acting like he was always going to do so. Let's be real, the trash talk at this tournament was legendary, but looking back, I'm kind of disappointed that it didn't go anywhere. Genesis X was the only major that Zamba won in 2024. Other stories in top 8 include the massive breakout of Shattuck and Neo, the 2 Corrin players who had to fight in Losers 8ths, continuing their rivalry that spawned from the exhibition match at last year's Super Smash Con. We also saw T make top 8 at his first major in a hot minute. Outside of top 8 though, we had quite a lot of upsets and storylines. By far the most notable is the story of MKLeo, Mr. Genesis himself, who failed to make grand finals at an Ultimate Genesis for the first time ever. Leo lost in pools to a Ken main named Titan, And although many people today will likely blame the BO3 format for this, in the end, Leo was in losers. He went on a massive losers run, sure, but ultimately lost to Gakt's Ness to place 25th. The other big underperformance here was Mia, who got upset by Roflo's Palutena early on in brackets, dropping into losers and going up against Zachary, who, let's not beat around the bush here, whooped Mia's ass, eliminating one of the horsemen at 17th place. The 25th range of placements here felt like the top 8 of previous majors, with names like Mudace, DeBuzz, Louis Money, and so many more hopefuls being eliminated. At least one player at this tournament had a driver's license to drive away with this win. And now, with one of the craziest tournaments of the year behind us, we can now move out of North America, but not back to Japan, oh no. Instead, we head to France for King Khan, Europe's only major in this season. Many players who had good performances at Genesis X were hoping to continue their momentum, like Neo and Spargo for example. But ultimately, it was the player who had the most notable underperformance that ended up taking home the gold. Up to this point in the year, MK Leo stocks had never been lower. He had been ranked outside of the top 10 for the first time in his ultimate career, and now had also failed to top 2 Genesis for the first time, much less top 8. Many people thought it was MK over. But then King Khan happened and MK Leo swept it. No kidding, it felt like Leo just decided to win, only going game 5 against Roflo in winners semis and Spargo in winners finals. Not even going game 5 in grands in the Spargo run back. We were MK back in this moment here as MK Leo took his first major win of 2024, the start of his comeback that will continue for the rest of the year. Other notable stories in the top 8 include Neo, who made another good performance, and Kid. Kid is a Mii Brawler player from France who gave Mii Brawler his first ever major top 8 by defeating lots of players, but most notably Mars. Roflo and Bloom Forever had good performances, and Orion gave Wolf a top 8 finish at a major for the first time in a while. Moving back over to Japan, we've got Sumobato SP45, one of many smaller Sumobato majors in 2024. This one saw a repeat grands from Kowloon 9 of Mia versus Raru, a matchup that would soon bloom into a somewhat one-sided rivalry. This tournament also saw Snow and Doramigi make good runs to top 4. In mid-March, the Litvitational 2 went down in Florida, the pre-local for the Cirque du CFL series. This tournament and the Litvitational 3 both were counted as majors, but it's worth noting that Lumirank amended the rules afterwards so that TOs couldn't abuse this loophole and basically get 2 majors in one. Light ended up winning the Litvitational 2, which would become a pattern much akin to Tweak's Tri-State Level Up. Most notably though, Light ended up winning over Mia, who pilots 2 matchups that Light is not very fond of, Steve and Game & Watch. Though Mia also whipped out his pocket Mii sword fighter, an interesting treat. Shattuck, Lima, and notably Cola also had good performances here. The next day, Cirque du CFL 3 happened, which saw a new major winner take the crown. Shattuck, who had started to make a come up at the tail end of 2023, really made his massive breakout performance, winning the tournament over Mudace, who had also not won a major at this point. Other notable names to make top 8 were Peebnut, who eliminated Mia and Zamba from the tournament in the best Mega Man run of the year, as well as Syrup at a tournament that marks the beginning of his meteoric rise in 2024. The 2 underperformances here were Mia and Ashimo, who both placed 7th. Outside of top 8, Shuton had a rare underperformance, placing 9th, and the new major winner Light had a massive failing at 17th place, after being upset by Apple Wiz the Ices main and then meeting Shuton in losers early. Our next major tournament, Collision 2024, was the return of widespread NA majors since Genesis X. And bouncing back from not winning Genesis or LMBM, Spargo took Collision 2024 extremely dominantly. In second place was Shattuck, continuing his claim to being America's best player. However, the 2 other big stories here were in 3rd and 4th place, Cola and Onin. These 2 players were in a slump near the end of 2023, but made massive returns to form here at Collision, with Cola defeating Leo, Light, and Mudace, and with Onin defeating Tilde, Tweak, Meister, and Cola. Outside of top 8, Didi had a phenomenal run to 9th, and Tweak had a disastrous end at 17th place, after losing to double Steve mains Onin and Didi. Heading back over to Japan, we've got Mayasuma U22, a major that was restricted to players only aged 22 and under. Here, lots of players like Miya, Ashimo, Hurt, Raru, and Doramigi continued their rises with top 8 finishes, but many others made big breakouts. Reno placed 7th with Byleth, basically the character's only top 8 finish this season and one of his only that didn't come from MK Leo. And Aegis placed 5th, one of Terry's only top 8 major finishes in the first half of the year, and one of the only ones in a while that didn't come from Riddles. But the main breakout at this tournament had to be the 2nd place finisher, Miru, a Kazuya main who went on an insane tear as the 35th seed, defeating Hurt, Tora, Aegis, and Ashimo. With that out of the way, we now move to our final tournament for March, and it was a big one, Battle of BC6. Canada's first major of the year. This tournament showed a shifting point in where the meta was going for 2024. At this point, while the Four Horsemen had some hiccups, with Sonics not taking a major yet and other major winners flooding in like Tweak, Light, Shattuck, and Zamba, we were still very much in a Four Horsemen-esque era, especially over in Japan, which still had Akola and Miya dominating most tournaments. But this tournament changed a lot, especially in regard to a single player, Hurt. Hurt was on a massive come up from the end of 2023 to the start of 2024, continuing to top 8 several majors, but he hadn't quite taken one yet. At Battle of BC6, Hurt finally had his break, defeating Syrup, Toriguri, Doramigi, and Spargo twice to win the tournament. Not only was this massive for Hurt, this also showed one of Spargo's main weaknesses, Snake. While Spargo's sets against Hurt for the rest of the year were mostly in Spargo's favor, several other Snake mains would take sets on Spargo, most notably Alandis at smaller Mexican regionals. In terms of the rest of top 8, Battle of BC6 was an odd flood of rare characters, most notably with base mages Jigglypuff and Toriguri's Banjo, with Toriguri in particular defeating MK Leo in a very discussed set. Other notable top 8 finishes include Riddles and Ouch fighting for Canada, Ouch giving Wolf yet another major top 8, as well as Doramigi and Yoshidora fighting for Japan, Doramigi's first big overseas breakout. Yoshidora's run was paired well with Ron's run to 9th at his first overseas tournament of the year, making Battle of BC6 a big tournament for Yoshi stocks, especially considering that the two of them won doubles together. Outside of top 8, a lot of Canadian players made big runs, most notably Big D. Also, Gluttony had a massive underperformance as he transitioned to a new controller to deal with his hand issues, one of many underperformances during this transition period. Going back over to Japan very briefly for another Sumobato, the usual suspects of Miya and Raru had good performances, with Miya taking the gold. Though notably, Yara made a run to 2nd place and Umeki made a run to 4th. Great performances for the two of them. Next up is a tournament quite near and dear to my heart, the first Luminosity Smash Invitational. This tournament was LG's first attempt at running their own invitational, and there were actually a few things that were quite controversial about it. The video I made on my personal channel about this tournament is probably one of the big reasons I got signed to this team in the first place, so you know. Clearly, I have no bias at all towards this tournament. Shattuck managed to take his 2nd tournament of 2024, winning over Sonics in yet another phenomenal run. And notably, this tournament featured 4 out of 5 of Luminosity Gaming's members make top 8. And lastly, DeBuzz had a great run to 3rd place. The reason I bring him up though is quite sad, because this was the last major DeBuzz would ever top 8. With all of his other tournaments either not being a major or with him missing out on top 8. These days, I'm convinced that DeBuzz is just retired without saying he's retired, so it's hard to not look at this performance as his last ever major top 8. At the end of April/beginning of May, we got Japan's Golden Week for 2024, with Mayasuma Grand Wars, Delta 8, and Kageribi 12 all going down within the span of a few days. And tons of invaders came over to Japan for these tournaments, but between them, they didn't do very well. Mayasuma Grand Wars was the smallest of these 3 tournaments, having the least amount of invaders and top players. The highest placing foreigner was Base Mage, who placed 9th, and Grand Finals saw Mia and Snow face off in one of Snow's best performances of the year so far. This tournament also saw 2 very notable runs to top 8. Firstly from Bayonetta main Nizamamo, and also from MZK, giving Duck Hunt a solo major top 8. Delta 8 was the crazy tournament that saw multiple others get re-tiered into majors. The top 8 was mostly just Japanese mainstays like Raru, Snow, Shuton, Mia, and Ikola, as well as good breakouts from Akikikusu and Tamapi Daifuku. But the one special player here, really, is level 1. This Toon Link main went on an insane run, eliminating both Spargo and Hurt, the grand finalists from Battle of BC. Not to mention that Spargo was in losers to begin with because he lost to Rarikikusu's Donkey Kong. This tournament was the epitome of Japan depth talent destroying North America, and it's quite interesting looking back at it. The highest placing invader was MK Leo, who almost made top 8, followed by Gluttony, Spargo, and Zamba. Lastly, we saw Kagari B12, which shook up the meta a little bit by not having a Cola win a Japanese super major. Instead, Hurt had yet another crazy run to 2nd place, with Mia taking 1st. The rest of the top 8 was filled up by Japanese mainstays, including Zachary making a rare yet electric appearance, and Tamapi Daifuku making yet another strong run. The highest placing international invaders were Gluttony, who got 9th, followed by Meister at 13th place, and the next highest were Zamba, Goblin, Jazo, and MK Leo, all of whom placed 25th. And lastly, in a massive underperformance, Spargo placed 33rd as the 2nd seed, after losing 2 Game 5s to Toriguri and Noi, which, as a side note, may be Pokemon Trainer's best individual win of the entire year. With Golden Week over, we now head over to Canada for a brief pause. Don't worry, we'll be back to Japan with 3 more majors in just a second, but first, we have to go over Get On My Level X. Get On My Level X is really similar to LMBM, mostly because it had the same exact grands, Tweak versus Sonics, with Tweak taking it in the end. Though what's different here is that Sonics lost in winner's quarters, and had to tear through the loser's side of bracket before grands, setting a precedent for long losers runs that Sonics would repeat multiple times this year. We also had Onin and Syrup both making top 8, with Steve Stonks rising, but at the same time, Tweak finally defeated Steve, overcoming one of his demons when he beat Syrup in winner's semis. The rest of top 8 had Big D top 8ing his first major this year, and Siski doing the same, with this also being his only NA major top 8 of the year. Outside of top 8, Monty and Cosmos had great runs to 9th place, and Shattuck underperformed at 13th. So now, in terms of North American storylines, we have Tweak taking 2 of the big majors over Sonics. And with Spargo underperforming so often overseas, a narrative started to form that Spargoat might indeed be washed, leaving a gap open in the Four Horsemen storyline. The frontrunners for replacing that vacuum are Hurt and Tweak, both of whom are making massive waves in their respective regions. But now it's time to go back to Japan for a lightning round of 3 Japanese majors, 2 of which being Sumobatos. First up is Sumobato SP47, probably the most notable of these 3. This tournament saw Raru take his first ever major win, giving Luigi his first major victory in any Smash game. In 2nd place was Kuropanzu, who went on a massive Cinderella run to 2nd place. And the rest of top 8 saw tons of breakouts like Ake, Shupi, and most notably Yonapi, who was perhaps the biggest story of the tournament since he defeated Mia in loser's bracket, giving this horseman his first big underperformance of the year at 9th place. Sumobato SP48 saw Hurt take yet another victory, though notably with Shirayuki making a massive run to 2nd place, giving Inkling her first major top 8 of the year. There were also a bunch of other big breakouts, including Karage, Kome, and Gorioka. And notably, this tournament also saw both Doramigi and Shuton underperform. Lastly, we've got Ult Core 3rd, which had a top 4 without any big breakouts, Hurt taking it over Raru. Notably though, this tournament saw Yoshidora have a great run after a period of not attending much in Japan. This tournament also saw Shirayuki and Toriguri make top 8, giving some more underrated characters another major finish. Now we've got 2 North American tournaments back to back. First heading over to North Carolina for Patchwork 2024. This tournament was a big one for North American talent, with a bunch of NA players who weren't top 10 all coming out in droves. Ultimately, Yates took the tournament over Zamba, with Yates winning their first ever major, and only major at the time of this recording. In 3rd and 4th place is Cola and Wrath, both of whom had great performances, with Wrath taking a set over Zamba. Other notable top 8s include Peebnut, Jazzo, and Monty, as well as having Shattuck underperform. Outside of this top 8, the most notable run belongs to Smub's run to 9th place, after getting Game 5 wins over Candle, Wilds, and Mugen. Next up, we move down to Mexico for their only major of 2024, S Factor 11. Renamed from Smash Factor due to Nintendo guidelines. This tournament was much like Genesis X in the sense that it's really confusing looking back in hindsight, because of how insane it was, but also because of how little it really led to. Sonics got second yet again, with Shiny Mark winning the tournament, his first major win, and Gact getting 3rd place out of nowhere. Spargo had yet another underperformance in his home country, and Shattuck actually had a pretty good run because he's the one who eliminated Spargo. Meister and Cosmos of all players had insanely good runs to top 8, with Cosmos in particular being the one who sent Spargo into losers. Of this top 8 though, there's one story that stands out, and that's Manny. This Steve main got a boost playing in his home country, like many people do, but Manny was unfortunately the victim of the extremely cruel Smash community, and I personally remember the outrage surrounding this run, especially since Manny defeated MK Leo to make it into top 8. But outside of top 8, we saw big underperformances from both Ashimo at 13th place and Zamba at 17th. Now we're heading back to Japan for yet another trio of majors. But these ones actually had quite a lot going on, with 2 new major winners. Sumobato SP49 saw Doramigi finally take his first major win over Raru, which is also Solo Minmin's first major win in all of Ultimate. This tournament also saw Ron, Level 1, Shirayuki, and Yamadi make top 8, with the most notable run being Yamadi giving Rosalina her first non-Dabuz major top 8 of the year. Seibugeki 17 saw Tamapi Daifuku win their first major over Shuton, the first time a Bayonetta player has ever won a major. This tournament also had massive breakouts, Fui, Huto, and Toriguri, but most of all, Gachipi, with this run giving Lucario his first ever major top 8. Lastly, we've got Kowloon 12 with Kaguribi, a massive tournament that saw a traditional grands of Mia Akola, where Mia actually took the win. The most notable story here though is Spargo's 3rd place finish, not underperforming like he had at previous Japan trips. Even though this was a good run, he actually lost to Akola's Aegis counterpick for the first time. This marked Akola's first time beating Spargo in a while, and we also had good runs from Level 1, Zachary, and Doramigi, who was the player who defeated Spargo in winner's bracket, a phenomenal win. And now, we're to the halfway point of this video, because we've made it to Supernova. But before the tournament itself, we have to get into the 2024.1 rankings. As we mentioned earlier, LumiRank separated 2024's rankings into 2 half-year rankings instead of 1 full year. That means that this is a great opportunity to check these rankings compared to 2023 and see where the players stand. In the broad strokes, this was the first time ever that Ultimate had Japanese players making up more than half of the rankings. Additionally, Ultimate's biggest legacy players dropped down to valleys they hadn't been to before. Most notably, MK Leo dropped down to 25th, his lowest ever ranking for Ultimate, and Gluttony dropped to 22nd. And while this isn't on LumiRank, I think it's important to mention that for the first time since Ultimate's release, the official European PR didn't have Gluttony as their #1 player, with Crepe Soleil officially overtaking Gluttony as the best player in Europe. These rankings saw several players who were on the come up, as well as unique major winners, shoot upwards in the rankings. For example, Shiny Mark, Snow, and Mudace, with Snow in particular rising 53 places in the rankings. Even more impressive than that are ranks 12 and 11, Doramegi and Raru, who rose 29 and 38 places respectively. As far as the top 10 goes, we have a few players who remained in the top 10, generally in the same spot, including Light, Shuton, and Tweak, as well as 3 of the Four Horsemen, Sonics, Mia, and Nicola, with Sonics staying in 3rd, Mia rising to 2nd, and Nicola staying at the best player in the world. But you may ask, where is Spargo? Well, the most notable story from this top 10 was Spargo, who fell all the way down to 9th best player in the world, mostly due to those Japanese underperformances we covered earlier. The new additions to the top 10 included Temapi Daifuku, who rose an insane 86 ranks, and Shattuck, who rose 37. And lastly, for our new top 10 players, we've got Hurt, whose amazing season resulted in him being ranked the number 4th best player in the world. So that's our first half of the year done. All in all, 3 of the 4 horsemen stayed just as dominant as they previously were, with only Sonics showing cracks in his armor due to his losses to Tweak. Several new Japanese prodigies were rising through the ranks, most notably Temapi Daifuku, but also Raru, Doramegi, and Snow to a lesser extent. And we have Spargo, who has sunk lower than he's been in a while. From this to his Japanese performances, many people claimed that Spargo was absolutely washed. And with that being the mindset of the crowd, we moved into Supernova and the surprises it would give us. So hey, funny thing about Supernova, it was one of, if not the craziest major of the entire year. And Spargo, you know, the guy I was just saying got ranked 9th and who people were claiming was washed? Yeah, he just decided to stop losing. Spargo absolutely cleaned house at Supernova, winning with no dropped sets, defeating Sonics in grand finals and being followed by Shattuck, who continued his rise to prominence with a 3rd place finish. But wait, you're asking, this tournament had the entire top 10 in attendance. What happened to the rest of them? The rest of top 8 only had both Hurt and Akola making it in, with the other slots being filled out by Yoshidora, Raru, and Ashimo, all of whom had amazing runs that foretold the amazing season they were all about to have. Well, not as much for Yoshidora, but certainly for the other 2. In terms of the rest of the top 10, most of it can be explained due to 2 key upsets that happened earlier on in bracket. Sonics, the rank 3, lost early to Snow's Mario in an insane upset, putting Sonics into losers. And like we mentioned earlier, Sonics has now grown accustomed to long losers runs, and so absolutely tore through the brackets, eliminating everyone in his path. Sonics being in losers is the primary reason why Light, Mia, Tweak, and Akola were all eliminated from the tournament well before they were supposed to, and perhaps the greatest losers run of the entire year. The other key upset is from LG's very own content creator, Mars, who defeated both Mia and Onin, but unfortunately was eliminated at 9th place. However, despite not making top 8, this run signified a massive return to form from Mars, after he had done practically nothing for the first half of the year. And the last top 10 players I haven't mentioned yet are Shuton, who lost to Raru and Mia for 17th place, and Temapi Daifuku, who lost to Crepe Soleil and Peanut for 25th. This tournament was so insane, you could make an entire video on just this tourney, which I did. You should really go watch it if you're interested. But in the interest of this video not being 2 hours long, I lastly want to mention both Geist and Itada, who made amazing runs to top 24 while being the only 2 players not seeded to make it there. Supernova took the new ranking season and threw it into chaos immediately. Spargo, number 9, who was supposed to be on a decline, won the whole thing, seemingly without breaking a sweat. The greatest losers run of the year went down, and ranks 1 and 2 in the world both had big underperformances. With that insane start behind us, we now move over to Japan for yet another trio of Japanese majors, consisting of Sumobato SP50, Delta 8.5, and Mayasumo Japan West 24. Sumobato SP50 saw the blooming rivalry of Raru versus Doramegi continue, this time with Raru taking it over Doramegi. Hurt actually got 3rd at this tournament, a slight underperformance, and Meister placed 4th. This span of time covers Meister's trip to Japan, which I've already covered in its own video. Most notably, this tournament saw Navy make top 8 at a major for the first time this year, a player who would go on to top 8 several more majors. And lastly, we also saw TAS give Piranha Plant his 2nd major top 8 ever, and his first one in recent history. Delta 8.5 saw another Japanese rivalry take the stage of grand finals, this time being Ken versus Shuton. Here, Shuton would take the win, obtaining his first major win of this new ranking season. Notably, Reno placed 3rd, piloting both Byleth and Sephiroth, very rare characters, to their first and basically only major top 8s of this season. And lastly, Mao ended up making several upsets, including over Meister, to place 5th, making Mao the 3rd Minmin player to top 8 a major in 2024, and the 2nd to do so in 2024.2. At least so far. Lastly, Japan West 24 was an invitational tournament of 24 players, the sequel to the massively popular Japan 24 tournament. Winning this was yet another entry in the one-sided rivalry of Rauru vs Mia, with Mia taking yet another gold. Meister also had an exceptional run to 3rd place, with the rest of the top 8 being filled out by pretty standard names, except for Shirayuki, who gave Inkling her first major top 8 of the season. Our next big North American tournament is Riptide 2024, which for some reason, seemingly every top player in the world decided to attend. Spargo, continuing his momentum from Supernova, swept this tournament without breaking a sweat, except for his set against the very notable 2nd place finisher, Shuton. Having his best run of the season, Shuton swept through several top players like Zamba, Beast Mode Paul, and Sonics twice, the first time being in winner's quarters, which means, yet again, Sonics made yet another insane loser's run, this time to 3rd place instead of 2nd. A notable 4th place finisher is Riddles, who at this point in time was basically committing to solo Terry Bogard instead of Kazuya. And oh boy, did this strategy bring him success at Riptide, with wins over Lima, Oshimo, and Zamba, only pulling out Kazuya for Beast Mode Paul. The rest of top 8 had good placements, with Syrup and BMP continuing their rise, Shattuck slightly underperforming but still making top 8, and Zamba placing yet another top 8 at a major. Outside of the final phase, basically every Japanese competitor other than Shuton had a big underperformance. Oshimo and Snow both placed 9th, same as both Light and Tweak by the way, but most surprisingly, Mia placed 13th, losing to Syrup and Light, and Hurt placed 17th, losing to Candle and Snow. This was Hurt's first big underperformance of the season, but it wasn't Mia's first. This was the point in time that people began to realize that Mia had a problem. He wasn't performing very well in North America. Genesis, Supernova, and now Riptide all resulted in massive underperformances. And whatever the reason may be, if Mia kept this up, his ranking would surely suffer. But the funny thing is that this wasn't Mia being washed, it was just in North America. I say that so confidently because our next tournament is Umabura SP11, which Mia ended up winning over Akola. Mia had quite the dominant time, defeating Akola's newly proven Aegis, but Akola himself was starting to suffer. This is because Umabura SP11 was Snow's big breakout, and his best win was Akola himself. Outside of the top 3, Zachary, Hurt, Akikikusu, and Doramiki all had good runs to top 8, continuing their stacked resume. But the big story of this tournament, at least for us, is MK Leo's run to 5th place, the first time that Leo has ever top 8'd a Japanese major. What's important to realize about this run is that MK Leo's counterpicks were immensely important, with Meta Knight, Byleth, and even some Roy being key to Leo's run to top 8. Outside of top 8, Rauru and Shuton had rare underperformances at 9th place, as did Tamapi Daifuku, who had a disastrous 17th, after being upset by Rocky and Akikikusu, starting Tamapi's slump in this season. Our next tournament, Sumobato SP51, is one that would welcome a new major winner, both in player and character, and single-handedly make the case for a player to perhaps be top 10. Oshimo made a massive run to win his first ever super major, his first major win, and Ryu's first major win ever. and most impressively, he did so over Akola, who had been upset by Akikikusu, the third place finisher, in winners quarterfinals. Not only was this tournament massive for Ashimo, Akola was now starting to have several cracks in his armor, losing big tournaments to Miya and now getting upset by the likes of Snow, Ashimo, and Akikikusu. For the rest of top 8, Meister had a great run to 4th place, getting a Raru win on the way, which was absolutely massive for him, and outside of the top 8, both Snow and Hurt had underperformances at 9th place. Going back over to North America, we've got the second Luminosity Smash Invitational, which saw Cola take his first major win of the year in an insane run over Spargo, who placed 2nd. Cola had an amazing run to enter Grands from winners, defeating Leo, Ashimo, and Shuton. The rest of top 8 had pretty standard performances, all things considered, with the main storyline outside of Grands being the fact that Sonics had a disastrous last place finish, after he and Spargo had to fight each other in Losers Round 1, with both of the top 2 in North America having rough pools performances. And now, it's back to Florida. The Litvitational 3 is the last Litvitational that will be counting for rankings, and Light took home the victory yet again, the Litvitational being real. Notably, Lima and T both had amazing performances to make runs to 2nd and 3rd place. Louis Money also had quite the notable run, and Spargo had an underperformance, being defeated by Miya for the first time in a hot minute to place 9th. The next day, Cirque du CFL 4 went down, and a lot of the patterns from the Litvitational continued. The main exception here is Miya, who overcame his NA block to win the tournament over Lima, who, just like the Litvitational, made an amazing run to 2nd place. It's also worth noting that Miya pulled out the Mii Sword Fighter in Grands and almost won with him. Light and Spargo placed 3rd and 4th, both of whom losing to Lima on his tear through losers, and T made yet another major run to top 8, notably defeating Spargo on the way. Outside of top 8, we saw TM7 Zap get 1 game away from making top 8 at a major, but sadly falling short in a run that was still really good. Additionally, Hurt had a massive underperformance at this tournament, placing 17th after being double upset by Peanut and Dominator. Snow also placed 17th, getting upset by Osh9's Mii Brawler and Goblin. Moving back over to Japan, we've got Sumobato SP52, which saw a repeat Grands of Ashimo and Akola, but with Akola taking it this time. Raru and Yoshidora had good standard runs, Yonapi and Umeki made yet another major top 8, but most notably, Rocky made top 8 at this major, foreshadowing for what's to come later on. Our next really big tournament was Delta 9, still in Japan, which saw Miya take the gold over Raru. However, this tournament was insane, not for either of those players, but for our 3rd place finisher, Ryope. Ryope is a Snake main who went on an insane Cinderella run as the 47th seed to finish 3rd at this massive super major. Additionally, our 5th place finishers of Toriguri and Temapi Daifuku both made great runs. Now we're finally getting into tournaments that feel like recent history, starting off November with Luminosity Makes Moves Miami 2024. Completing his triple crown of LG EMG tournaments was Tweak, taking it over Sonics yet again, including a game that will go down as the greatest comeback of this entire year. Light and Leo had good runs to 3rd and 4th, with MK Leo continuing his comeback. The strongest run here probably belongs to Wrath, who defeated the 1st seed Miya in yet another crazy comeback. And this top 8 was rounded out by players who were already having amazing years in Meister, Lima, and Riddles. Outside of top 8, we had a massive underperformance from both Miya and Shattuck, who were both upset twice to place 9th. Additionally, Cola and Mars both suffered upsets to place 25th. Now it's time for something a little different. The Throne 2, an invitational tournament in the style of Summit that invited several hype players and allowed for multiple vote-ins. Notably, players who piloted quote-unquote lame characters were not invited, like Sonics, Miya, and Nicola. Ultimately, Spargo would take another victory here over Light, who made a great run to 2nd. Notably though, Spargo had to win through losers after being upset by MK Leo, who placed 3rd in yet another massive victory. The rest of top 8 is filled with some good names like Tweak, Zachary, and Hurt, but there are 2 names here that are very important to mention: Candle and Rimu. Candle is the American Olimar who has been racking up insane wins like crazy, like Hurt at Riptide and Akola at a pre-local that didn't end up counting for rankings but is still impressive either way. But at the throne too, Candle also went on a crazy run, with wins over Dryby, Mutace, and Rimu twice, and even taking a game off of Spargo in what is indubitably Olimar's worst matchup. Rimu is a Japanese Minmin player who was the first player invited into the throne too, who made top 8 at a major for the first time, thanks to his wins over Cola, Chunky Kong, Mars, and Riddles, fully putting on display North America's glaring weakness to Min, since we basically don't have any over here. Outside of top 8, the player who deserves a highlight is Dryby, a German Pichu player who was voted in. Many people weren't fond of this when it happened, given that Yonapi, seen as the best Pichu, was also a contender to be voted in. But Dryby, though not having an impressive final placement, certainly got the wins to justify their inclusion, defeating Mars and Shattuck, breaking what's known as the Pichu curse. If you're out of the loop, in the past, any Pichu player invited into Summit never wins a set. Games, sure, but never a set. That all changed forever, thanks to Dryby. It's time for us to head up to Seattle for Don't Park on the Grass 2024, a return of Smash Ultimate's first ever major, Don't Park on the Grass 2019. Many players came from across the world to celebrate Ultimate's long history, and naturally, it was Spargo who won this tournament over Mia, who is slowly but surely overcoming his North American block. The main story from this tournament though is Louis Money, who went on the run of a lifetime as the Japan Slayer. After losing early to Ken, Louis Money defeated Tora, Lemon, MFA, MVD, Shuton, and Ken in the run back, only losing a game 5 to Mia. The rest of top 8 was filled up with Japanese mainstays like Shuton, Ken, Raru, Snow, and wait a minute, is that MVD? Yup, MVD top 8 at a major in 2024, which shouldn't really surprise us given that MVD won the original Don't Park way back when. As the 18th seed, MVD defeated Big D, Tarek, and JDV to enter top 8, only losing in a game 5 to Louis Money. And even his first loss to Spargo also went to game 5, showcasing Spargo's snake vulnerability, but also showing just how on MVD was at this tournament. Outside of top 8, this tourney saw multiple Japanese players come overseas for the first time to compete, primarily Rarikikusu and Tora, but also Maida-kun, the legendary TO of the Mayasuma series. Of these 3, the best performing was Rarikikusu, who placed 9th. Our last 2 tournaments of today's video both take place in Japan, the first of which being Ult Core 4th, which saw yet another entry in the Raru-Doramigi rivalry, which Raru ultimately won. But Doramigi had an amazing losers run at this tournament, being upset early by Ryuo and then defeating the likes of Temapi Daifuku, Ryuo in the run back, Akola, and Yoshidora to place 2nd. A big streak of wins for Doramigi. The rest of top 8 was filled with Japanese mainstays, with Alice and Ryuo notably making good runs, and also Akola having a low placement of 4th, after losing to Yoshidora and Doramigi. And lastly, our final tournament is Sumobato SP53, which may actually be the craziest tournament of the season. That's because this entire top 8 only had one player who had won a major before, Doramigi, who placed 3rd. Grand finals consisted of Rocky, who we mentioned earlier, and Taikei, Japan's 2nd best Sonic player, and thus Rocky took home his first ever major, with the rest of top 8 consisting of insane picks. Navy, Rarikikusu, and Suna all made runs to top 8, but all of whom having made top 8 at a major before. But the final 2 players, Shion and Tawadi, made their first ever major top 8. Shion is a hero main you may know as the player who upset Mia after only playing the game for a handful of months, making the highest peak of his dramatic rise so far. And lastly, Tawadi is a Sora player who went on an insanely long losers run to make top 8 as the 77th seed on a true Cinderella run. Outside of top 8, all of the notable top 8 seeds like Snow, Level 1, Shirayuki, and most notably Raru all had massive underperformances. And that wraps it up for 2024 Smash Ultimate. Well, almost. There are actually 2 more majors that went down this year, but they're actually going to count for next season's rankings, not this season. But for the sake of going over all of 2024, we'll briefly go over them, even though they don't count for this season's rankings. Smash Awesome over in Japan saw Hurt win his first super major of the new season, with Shuton coming in 2nd place. Akola and Mia were both at this tournament, but both underperformed, with Akola being double eliminated by Hurt and Mia getting double upset. First by Sasusoro's Rob in an insane upset matchup-wise, and then by Akikikusu in Losers 8s, who beat Mia's Game & Watch and Steve. In terms of the rest of top 8, the notable stories here include Uwame making a phenomenal run, and Carmelo, the Steve main most famous for a dominant record over Gluttony, top 8ing his first major. Then we've got GSM, which went down in France and had several Japanese invaders. But it was none of them who took the gold, with Lima instead winning his first ever major in Ultimate, by defeating Doramigi, the second place finisher and highest placing Japanese player, twice. The rest of top 4 actually had 2 Europeans make phenomenal runs, with third place finisher Raflo defeating Snow and fourth place finisher Siski defeating Ashimo. Outside of that, the massive story of this tournament was Ball, the Japanese King K. Rool main who has never left Japan before, who gave King K. Rool his first ever major top 8. I actually won't go too in-depth about it here, because I'm planning on giving Ball a dedicated video all to himself on this channel eventually. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And that wraps it up for Smash Bros in 2024. So now that we're looking towards the end of year rankings, what should we expect? I should mention that what I'm about to say is just my opinion, not some sort of hint for the Lumi rank. And I'm not even sure this video is gonna come out before the rankings do. With that said, I don't think this will surprise anyone, but I think Spargo has got #1 in the world locked down. I'm really looking forward to it too, since Spargo has been working towards this goal for years, always being second place or worse. But for this season, he's finally been consistent and dominant enough to take gold. Akola, for his part, has probably dropped down to at least #4 due to his inconsistency and lower attendance that isn't justified by an absolute dominance anymore. That leaves 2 and 3, which is a toss-up between Mia and Sonics. But in my mind, Mia will probably be #2 and Sonics will probably be #3. Tweak will absolutely still be top 10 with his great LG EMG wins, but I think this season will see a lot of new people in top 10. Raru, for instance, will almost certainly join these ranks. He was already #11 and he's only gotten better since. Alongside Raru, I think Doramigi and Ashimo both have good cases to make top 10. If you ask me, I think Raru might replace Shattuck in the top 10, and Doramigi Ashimo might replace Hurt and Temapi Daifuku, both of whom have had a rough season. Well, maybe not rough, but they and players like Light or Shattuck have had fine seasons. It's just that other players have had even better ones. If it were up to me, this is probably how I'd rank the top 10. Spargo, Mia, Sonics, Akola, Raru, Tweak, Doramigi, Ashimo, Shuton, and Light. The 11 to 20 range probably includes names like MKLeo, Shattuck, Hurt, and Temapi Daifuku, but honestly, anything beyond the top 10 is Greek to me, so discussing it is somewhat pointless. But now that I've given out my list, who do you guys think will make top 10 this season? And if the rankings are already out by this point, just comment about how wrong I was or something. Let me know in the comments down below. With all of that said and done, I've been Mr. Mice, and thank you all so very much for watching.